I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is PsycHacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is of cats and cheese. So this is the framework I use to approach the construct of human motivation. Basically, there are only two things that motivate human action: cats and cheese. Cheese is a reward associated with anticipated pleasure and fulfillment that we approach. Cats are punishments associated with anticipated pain or loss that we avoid. So if you understand the relative intensity and distribution of cheese in a person's awareness, and the relative intensity and distribution of cats in the same, you can pretty accurately predict how that person will move through life at any given moment. Now, before I unpack this framework further, please remember to like this episode and subscribe to this channel. It takes less than a second, costs you nothing, and it would really help to get this message out to more people. So if you like what I'm saying here today, then please do the thing. Also, if you're thinking of going to grad school, please check out stellargre.com and use the code PSYCH for 10% off all membership plans. Now, this motivational framework of mine has some basis in the empirical literature. Researchers have long studied maze running behavior in rats. Unsurprisingly, when cheese is placed at the maze's terminus, rats tend to move more quickly through the maze than they do if they are simply exploring in a non-directed fashion. So rewards incentivize approach behaviors. On the other hand, when the scent of a cat, a rat's natural predator, is wafted into the maze behind the rat, rats tend to move even more quickly through the maze than they do when they are moving toward the cheese. So punishments incentivize avoidance behaviors, and punishments are more incentivizing than rewards. And this is because, as I discussed in my episode, The Balance of Pain and Pleasure, pain is overpowered on this planet relative to pleasure. People, like rats, will do more to avoid pain than to secure pleasure. Understanding this basic principle will help you make more accurate predictions, both about your own behavior and about that of other people. So punishments are more motivating than rewards. However, to optimize motivation, you ideally want to utilize both. The fastest maze running behavior is observed when rats are running away from a cat and towards some cheese. And the more these things are clearly defined and immediately present, the more powerful these incentives become. Another thing to keep in mind is that in this maze that we call life, there is no escaping the cats and no avoiding the cheese. On some level, cats and cheese are inherent to the maze itself. They never disappear entirely, they just change their forms. For instance, some first-level cats might be the inability to avoid the basic necessities of life: food, clothing, shelter. This cat can be avoided in several different ways: begging, stealing, or more pro-socially, performing a service for another. So the cheese here would be the money necessary to procure those things. However, once that cat is successfully avoided, another comes to take its place. A second-level cat in this domain might be the presence of a felt sense of financial insecurity. And this cat can be avoided in other different ways, all of which basically involve acquiring money faster than it is consumed. So the cheese here would be the money necessary to feel free of emotional insecurity, etc. I'm lonely is a low-level cat. I'm lacking a fulfilling relationship with someone who really interests me is a high-level cat. I'm depressed is a low-level cat. I'm not entirely self-realized is a high-level cat. You see, the cats never really go away. They just sort of evolve. And this is because what might have motivated you to run nearer the beginning of the maze might not be worth expending any effort toward the further you progress through the maze. Now, if optimal motivation is accomplished through a combination of cats and cheese, then a smart person will find ways to explicitly and intentionally introduce cats and cheese into his or her life. And that's because the person will understand that it's really the presence of these things, and especially the presence of cats that instigate constructive, meaningful action. Furthermore, where we believe we are relative to the incentives that we have identified will significantly alter our sense of self and our perception of reality. For instance, if we believe that we are close to the cat and very far from the cheese, then life is going to feel like hell. Vicious, hopeless, and cruel. On the other hand, if we're close to the cheese and very far from the cat, then life is going to feel like heaven. Rich, rewarding, and abundant. Both conditions exist in the same maze. The maze is not one or the other. The maze is the medium through which those conditions emerge. And while it's true that some folks just seem to be born closer to the cheese than to the cat, and vice versa, it's actually mostly up to us what we choose to consider a cat and what we choose to consider some cheese. And this is true because one person's cheese will not motivate any effort in another. I mean, your own cheese 5 years ago might not motivate any effort from you today. And that can only really be true if cats and cheese are not objective features of reality, but perceptual constructs that evolve as we do. And if this is true, then we might actually have much more control over whether we live in hell or whether we live in heaven than we may at first anticipate. What do you think? How do you introduce cats into your own life? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you for listening.